Tonight's story is about a cult that worships no gods, only a house no one is allowed to look into. Inside that house, children go blind, go deaf, and disappear forever, all in the name of keeping it clean. One girl broke the rule and peeked through the window. What she saw made her smile as they cut out her tongue. Because some houses don't need gods, they only need believers. Welcome to Nightmare Proof, where true horror comes alive. Here, you'll hear real stories of the strange, the disturbing, and the unexplainable. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to face the darkness. I grew up in a cult that worshipped no gods, just a house that none were allowed to look into. He never told us who built it. The house stood on a small hill ringed by trees. Its walls were made of sawn logs, and its roof was covered with bark shingles. It had a covered porch with polished branch pillars. There were windows of blown glass that were as clear as a pond in winter. It was of poor materials, and yet no one could deny it was made with care. Every plank sanded smooth, and not a nail out of place. There was no path to the house. There was no outhouse that could service it. No one knew what the inside looked like. No one lived there, yet every week we cleaned it. When you hear the word cult, you think of doomsday. We were not obsessed with things as trivial as the end of the world. We never talked about fire, brimstone, or when God was going to burn the sinners to bone, saving us and us alone for his band of immortal worshippers. All we talked of was the house and how to keep it clean. Our leader, Mike, wasn't crazy. All cult followers say that about their leaders, right up until the poison passes between their lips. But I don't believe Mike was actually insane. He did horrible things. I've had time to come to terms with that, to realize the depths of his depravity. But to us, he was soft-spoken, kind, and generous with his time. He didn't ask for money. He refused the bodies of the cult members offered to him in lust. He was still married to the wife he had met 40 years ago, decades before he had found the house and created his cult. She made cookies on Wednesdays that she shared with the children. No, the only thing crazy about Mike was how much he cared about that house. In his stories, we were told he found it while backpacking across the mountains. Mike said something drew him to it, something deep within him. He went inside and saw many wonderful things. He never told us what, but he didn't have to. Whenever he talked of the house or of going inside, his face would take on a sheen, an illumination. Younger me never thought to explain away the phenomenon or question it. I believed with a simple faith. Such was the power of the house. When Mike spoke about it, he glowed. It was not long after going inside that Mike started the preservation community. And with that, our cult was born. The police in their filings determined our group to be a sex cult. I think that's oversimplistic. Yes, everyone who could was either making or having babies. This was not for fetishistic reasons. It was purely economical. More children meant more hands to clean and preserve the house. It might have been wild and orgy-like when Mike brought the first group to the settlement back in 1974, but by the time I was born, sex wasn't a passionate affair of the heart anymore. It was a science. Couples were chosen at the beginning of their childbearing years, around 15, and they were selected to minimize the inbreeding quotient of the community. Each couple was expected to produce a minimum of one child a year. The resulting children were divided into 3 groups: the cleaners, the gardeners, and the offered. 10 days after a child was born, Mike would take it from its parents. He, his wife, and an attendant would go into a special part of the woods. Mike would meditate, trying to discern what group the child would best belong to. Sometimes it took minutes, other times it took hours. Once, it took him a full day to decide. I often volunteered to serve as the attendant that would accompany them. I would watch Mike make his decision. I liked to wonder what he was thinking, trying to predict what group he would choose. All the babies looked the same to me, small and soft. I never was able to guess right, even though I tried for years. Once he had decided, the sorting would begin. If the child was to be a cleaner, the attendant would provide Mike an eyedropper full of bleach. His wife would hold open the baby's eyes. Mike would then put 3 drops into each orb. The process would be repeated until the child had gone completely blind. there was a 98% survival rate. Once they were blind, they were proclaimed a cleaner. If the baby was to be a gardener, Mike would be given a long hypodermic needle. His wife would secure the child's head, and Mike would rupture each of the baby's eardrums. Again, the process would be repeated until the child was completely deaf. This process was notably less traumatic, and the child would usually stop crying once they were given a few sips of morphine-laced milk. If a child was selected to be an offered, they would be taken away and given to the nursing mothers. Their selection ritual would come at a later date. While cleaners and gardeners were given back to their parents, those who gave birth to offered would never interact with their child again. When an offered was sorted, we would spend a night in mourning. For the parents, for the child, for the community. Sometimes children would be born naturally blind or deaf. Mike called this a great mercy. These babies were seen as special and given the moniker of self-selectors. I was a self-selector. I was born deaf and sorted into the gardeners only 8 days after my birth. My parents were gardeners. They were grateful to have a child born into their own sorted group. The gardeners and the cleaners had little reason to speak to one another. The cleaners communicated vocally, while the gardeners only used ASL. For gardener parents to have a cleaner child was akin to seeing the child die. It did not happen frequently, but it was not impossible. Beyond the needs of infanthood, each group trusted the parents of the others to care for the children they were unable to take care of themselves. Such a thing was the only link between our two groups. All my friends were gardeners. We were taught hand signs from the beginning so we could speak to each other. At school, we were educated in botanical matters and taught how to tend a lawn, weed a plant bed, and mix the correct quantity of fertilizer and soil. We never knew what the cleaners were taught, as they used no visual aids. We would see them gathered and huddled at their class space near ours in camp. I would see their lips move, and I would wonder what they were saying. Once we had turned 10, we were deemed old enough to be put on rotation. Every week, 20 names would be drawn by Mike from 2 large wooden bowls, one for the gardeners, one for the cleaners. Those whose names were drawn would be washed clean at sunset, then anointed with blood, drawn fresh from Mike's arm. They would then ascend the hill towards the house and begin the ritual of care. The cleaners would enter the house one by one, cleaning supplies in one hand while they groped into the darkness with the other. The gardeners watched from afar until the door was shut. Then, once it was full dark, we would turn on our camping headlamps and make our way to the lawn. We would begin accomplishing the many chores Mike required us to do. The older ones took the responsibility gravely, but not us, the youngers. We felt no danger from the house, despite the repeated warnings. We didn't just ignore the rules, we flaunted them. A rule oft repeated to us gardeners in training was to never look inside the windows of the house. Whenever we would question why, most would just more forcefully repeat the rule. Others would try to explain, but their explanations would be confusing and did little to quell the curiosity of a child. So naturally, we made a game of it all. We often speculated what could be in the house. Many of us had grown up in tents and could only imagine what these things called rooms even looked like. The adults would not discuss the house's interior with us, and so we imagined it to be a continuation of the forest where we lived, with plants growing on the ground and water running in streams through the length of it. One child, Patty, claimed to have snuck inside one night. She claimed she saw great trees, and that everything was larger on the inside than out. For weeks, she held us captivated with her stories, making us beg for more. I, along with my friends, loved the tales and believed them wholly. Actually, believed feels too weak a word. I had hoped beyond hope that they were true, but they were lies. I was 14 the night Mia and I were selected for gardening duty. I remember that night with exact clarity. I will for the rest of my natural life. Mia was my friend. We were born in the same week. That day, sunset came and we were washed. Mia splashed me with water, and I did the same to her. We giggled as we were reprimanded, and hid our smiles as we were anointed with blood. We climbed the hill, signing to each other our secret jokes, and not thinking much of the work that needed to be done. Once the cleaners had entered the home, we turned on our lamps, still joking to one another in the dark as we pulled weeds and cut grass. At around midnight, the moon disappeared behind a small layer of cloud. The small amount of silver illumination it had provided vanished. Our headlight beams cut cones in the darkness, and still we were unafraid. We were beneath a window, planting new wildflowers in the bed beneath it. I was in the middle of signing to Mia how Danny, another gardener, had tried to kiss me after our class the other day, when a small sliver of golden light split the air, blinding us. Mia and I looked up and saw that the curtains in the window had been pulled apart a fraction of an inch. We had heard of things like this happening, but we had never experienced it ourselves. We never knew that there were lights inside of the home. I was breathless with awe. We stood and looked at the glowing slice several seconds, just basking in the radiance. It was my idea to peek inside. I told Mia we could see if what Patty said was true. Mia was a non-believer of Patty's stories, and that was enough to sway her to my side. I could tell she was nervous. Mia liked to joke, but was easily frightened by new things. We had an argument over who should be the one to actually look. I had suggested it, but there was a nervous excitement that kept me from pressing my eye up to the glass. We were breaking a rule, after all. We played a game of rock, paper, scissors to see who would look. That felt fair to us. I won. Mia lost. Mia looked at me, and I thought for a moment she wouldn't do it. But she steeled her face and gripped the edge of the window with her fingers. My heart thudded in my chest, and I almost told her to stop. I wish I had. Mia checked to see if no one was watching, then put her face directly into the thin beam. She peered into the house. For 10 minutes, she did not say anything. After the first minute, I asked a question. She ignored me. I tried to get her attention, and still, she kept her eye fixed on the window. I started to panic. She had never behaved like this before. I grabbed her arms and shook. Her muscles were like iron, and she was frozen in place, staring. Something had gone wrong. Something was happening to her. I tried to pull her away from the window, but she just gripped tighter to the sill. I pulled and pulled, and the light cut off. Someone on the inside had closed the curtain. Mia collapsed and fell back on top of me, and I rolled her off to see if she was okay. She was staring off into the distance, her mouth open and her pupils large. She swallowed a few times, then blinked. She shook her head and sat up. I asked her what she had seen. What was in the house? She never answered me. She got up, turned, and went down the hill. The next day, Mia was not in our usual class. I asked my teacher where she had gone. They did not want to tell me, but I kept asking until they were forced to answer. I was informed that Mia had volunteered to become an offered. She was to be given the next week. While we had no fear of the house as children, we did fear the offered. We did not discuss it amongst ourselves, but the adults were often talked of them quietly, wondering who was next for the ritual of giving. The ritual process was relatively simple. Once a month, after the cleaning and weeding, the gardeners and the cleaners would ascend to the hill. They would gather in 2 large bodies, forming a path up to the threshold of the home. Back at camp, Mike would go to offered. He would ask for volunteers. If there were none, he would personally select someone among their ranks to be given. Before I speak of what happens next, there is something you must understand. To us, the offered were not human beings. They were Homo sapiens, in species only. While their genetic code might have been the same as mine, they possessed no other qualities that would suggest cognizant life. From an early age, they were kept from all forms of knowledge. They were not taught to speak, they were not taught to read, and they were not taught to write. They were fed twice as many meals as the rest of us, double portions. Volunteers would tend to their every need, keeping them docile and receptive to orders. They behaved as animals, just as Mike had designed them. Most did not live beyond 15. Sacrificial lambs. After selecting an offered for the giving ritual, Mike would take them to the place of sorting. It was fitting that the ritual of giving should be begun in the same spot where they were chosen all those years ago. Mike would take chloroform that he had purchased on one of his many trips to town. He would force the offered to take several deep breaths. Their eyes would go glassy, and their minds would move somewhere beyond the realm of mortality and into the void of unconsciousness. Then, with a knife, he would cut out their tongue. The wound would be cauterized with a repurposed branding iron. The lips would be sewed together and pasted over with a combination of papier-mâché and wax. Once the Offord awoke, they would be in great pain. We would give them morphine injections to help them relax. They would return to their docile forms, almost like nothing had happened at all. Once they were prepared, Mike would personally lead them up the hill through the groups of gardeners and cleaners. They would go slowly, like the guests of honor at a funeral procession. After ascending the hill, they would stop at the porch. Mike would then lead the Offord onto the porch and to the front door. More morphine would be administered if they tried to struggle. Mike would then open the door and lead the Offord inside. He would let go of them, step out, and shut the door from the outside. Then we would wait. Mike claimed this was to see if they would re-emerge, but they never did. Seeing the Offord enter the house was the last we would ever see of them on this mortal coil. For an hour, we would stand vigil outside a silent house. Then, one by one, we would leave. A month would pass, and then the ritual of giving would take place again. Month after month, year after year. Mike allowed for any members of his community to become an Offord if they so desired. It was seen as a form of self-selection. It was rare, but it happened. Mia took this option. The entire week before she was to be given, I couldn't bring myself to see her. I felt too much guilt, but I knew I had to visit her one last time before she entered the house, before she vanished forever. So when the time came for the ritual of giving, and Mike asked me to be his assistant, I reluctantly said yes. I had only seen the process once before. The Offord had been a larger boy. After the surgery, he had woken in rage and pain, so much so that he had torn up a tree. I was afraid this would be a similar experience. The night of the ritual, Mike and I went to go get Mia. When we arrived at the Offord part of camp, she was sitting by herself. The other Offord gave her a wide berth. They seemed scared of her. Mia's face glowed with a strange light. The same light Mike's face had when he spoke of going the inside of the house. It was almost like she was still looking in that window, taking in whatever was there was to see. Mia jumped to her feet when she saw Mike. She smiled and made her way over. For the first time in my life, I saw Mike look uneasy, but he took her hand and led her to the place of preparation. On the way, I tried to get Mia's attention. She would not even glance in my direction. Any hopeful thought I had of helping her escape was dashed. Mike didn't even have to drag her like some of the Offord. She skipped to the surgery table and laid down with a smile. Mia took in deep whiffs of the chloroform and went to sleep. She was still grinning, even when we pried back her teeth and took out her tongue. We branded the wound, and steam came out as the blood vaporized. We sewed her lips with a hot needle and plastered over her mouth with papier-mâché and wax. I went to wash my hands, as I thought that would be the end of it, but Mike turned his attention to her hands. I signed to him, asking what he was doing. He explained that she could not be allowed to speak. Mia could speak with her hands as well as her tongue. My entire body went cold as I understood what he was saying. I swallowed back tears and got to work, removing Mia's hands. It took longer than anticipated. We cut away the flesh, broke the bone, and cauterized the veins and arteries. We sewed a leftover flap of skin over the wound. We wrapped white gauze over each stump, which quickly grew red with blood. She had lost a lot of it, and I was worried she would never wake up. But Mike assured me that she would. They always do. As we waited for her to wake, Mike and I sat in silence next to each other. I started to cry. I leaned over and felt Mike's arm wrap around me. As he comforted me, I confessed to him what had happened at the house. I told him about Mia looking in the window and how I was the one that told her to do it. Mike listened. He didn't seem angry, only sad. Once I was done, he asked me a question. "Did you look inside?" I told him I didn't. He asked another question. "Did she tell you what she saw?" I told him she hadn't. Mike nodded, then looked at the grass. I could tell he was thinking. It was the same expression he had when he sorted the babies. "You are telling the truth," he signed to me. "Otherwise, you'd be begging to go inside as well. It took a long time, but I finally gathered enough courage to ask Mike a question that had been burning inside of me ever since Mia volunteered to be offered. What is inside the house? Mike looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he would answer. Then, he turned away. After a moment, he signed, "When it is your turn to go, I will tell you." We didn't talk anymore after that. Eventually, Mia woke up, and we gave her the painkiller. She didn't need it. Her eyes were bright the moment she rose up from the table. Once the shots were administered, she got up without any help and set off on her own in the direction of the house. Mike and I followed behind her, up the hill, up past the crowds. They all watched us solemnly. I could see Mia's parents sobbing when we passed them. They tried to sign to their daughter, telling her to come back, to not go, but Mia didn't even glance in their direction. Mia and Mike reached the threshold. I found my place in the crowd. I watched as Mia stepped onto the porch. Extra painkiller was offered, then refused. Mike led Mia to the door and opened it. Without even looking back, Mia stepped inside. Mike closed the door, and we waited. After an hour, people began to leave. After another hour, only me, Mike, and Mia's parents were left. By the 5th hour, it was only me and Mike. I was tired, but I didn't want to sleep. I kept hoping that Mia would emerge, that the doorknob would turn and she'd come out, excited to see me and ready to put aside whatever craziness had gotten into her head from looking in that window. But I knew it was a false hope. She was gone. Mike left to give me some alone time with the house. I cried and walked back to the flower bed, where Mia and I had only a few days ago been dreaming about what was inside this cursed house. I looked at the window, and even with all the horror of the past day, I felt myself wanting to look inside. I wanted to see what had made Mia so willing to give up on life itself so she could be there with it. But the curtains were drawn tight, so I turned and made my way down the hill. I don't know what made me do it, but halfway to camp, I looked back. Something was written on the window. The letters glinted in the moonlight. They must have been written in the time it took me to get to the bottom of the hill. At first, I thought the words were written in black. I made my way back up to the house, and they became more and more red with each step. They were written in blood, Mia's blood. My heart stopped when I read what they said. The words spelled out my name, and then a message: Mike lies, room evil. The next day, I snuck into Mike's car when he left to go to town. I didn't tell my parents or anyone. We were never forbidden to leave. It's just no one ever did. No one wanted to. Only now do I realize how strange that sounds. Once we arrived in town, I got out of the car and ran to an alley. The buildings were huge. I had to stamp down my awe. I had never known you could build things so tall. When I looked back at the car, I saw Mike staring in my direction. He looked sad. I didn't wait to see if he would chase me. I ran away as fast as I could. I don't think he even tried to follow me. The police found me. I told them about Mike, the house, the community. They were never able to find it, even though they tried several times. I was never able to give them the right location. Eventually, I was reintegrated into society. I went to public school, spent time in the foster care system. I'm grown now, and the world has changed a lot. I've changed too, but I never forgot the house, the window, and the blood glinting in the moonlight. Yesterday, I was looking on Google Maps for the forest where I used to live. I had done this many times before and found nothing. I never really believed it would work, but this time, something caught my eye. A peculiar shape. A small circle of light green with a dark speck in its center. I zoomed in, and my heart skipped. That roof, those shingles, the house. Young me wanted to stay away for good. But older me has had time to think about Mia, about what happened that night when she looked in the window. That light we saw has festered itself into my brain. Those questions still remain. What did Mia see? What is in that house? And why did Mike lie about it? Maybe if I go back, I'll figure it out. Mike owes me some answers. Thank you for watching Nightmare Proof. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the nightmares alive. Have a story of your own? Send it in, and you may hear it here next time. Until then, sleep well if you can.